unless you have a question. I have been a teacher for a long, long time, and so interruptions don't really bother me. So if you have a question and you want to unmute and ask, please feel free to do that. It's not going to disturb me. And oftentimes, you know, I like to see people's reactions. So feel free to share if you have to share. So I'm looking forward to talking with you all today. This is actually a presentation I put together at the end of June for the psychic fair, but I really had fun doing it, and I added some more specific astrology charts and language for you guys today, thinking that you probably have a little more knowledge and background than like the average person who walked in at the psychic fair. But what I'm going to talk about is really the last quarter of 2023, what's ahead, and then kind of how I see the next decade playing out as a bigger story that started in the 1960s. If I haven't met you before, my name is Denise Hancock, and I'm an astrologer with a home base in New Orleans, but I'm in Florida for a few months until about Thanksgiving, house sitting. So enjoying hurricane season from the other side of the Gulf of Mexico this year. So essentially what I'm going to be talking about is cycles within cycles. One of the core things to remember as you make predictions, whether it's for yourself or it's the world at large, is that the slower the planet is, the longer and larger its influence is going to be on your life or on the world. So when we're making predictions for the entire world, we don't pay a whole lot of attention to what Mercury's doing and Venus, or even necessarily Mars, unless they happen to slow down and linger for a longer period of time. And so when we look at world astrology, what we're really paying attention to are what I would call the outer planets, which is really the planets of Jupiter and beyond. Whereas the sun and Mercury and Venus, they go around the Earth from our perspective every year. A planet like Jupiter takes 12 full years to go around the zodiac. So Jupiter spends about a year in each zodiac sign. So you're usually going to notice where Jupiter is in your life. And in the world, we would notice where Jupiter is. Saturn's even slower. Saturn takes 28 years to go around the zodiac. And so normally Saturn is in one specific sign from like 2.5 up to 3 years. Uranus, even slower, takes 84 years to go around the zodiac. Neptune, slower still, 165 years. And Pluto, almost 250. And so those are the cycles that I pay attention to when I make these longer term forecasts. And I'll also be touching specifically on Jupiter and Saturn when we get to talking about how it impacts your particular zodiacs. So from my point of view, a lot of the changes that we're seeing in the world that I really want to focus on today started in the 1960s. In October of 1965, there was a conjunction between Uranus and Pluto, and it happened at 17 degrees Virgo. And the 1960s and this particular conjunction really kicked us off into a whole 139-year cycle that revolutionized a lot of our culture, what we think about in terms of gender roles, family norms, sexual behaviors, civil rights issues, social justice. It really, to me, is a remarkable conjunction that again only happens every 140 years, and in which we're really seeing playing out in the incidences that we've seen in the last decade and what I see coming forth into the next decade. My Zoom's being fussy a second. I'm going to stop this share for a second to bring it back because I want to play a video for you in the next screen, and I know I need to click something that it wouldn't let me see. So give me just a second. Okay, here we go. Share sound. Hopefully that worked. I don't know why Zoom is being super fussy lately. Again, I guess it's part of that just technology thing of everything's moving around. So if you're not familiar with the 1960s Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, I put the chart up on the screen for you. And you can see that it actually took place across from Saturn and Pisces, but they came together in 1965. And when we talk about these big outer planet conjunctions, we usually give them a 10 to 15 degree orb, which really meant that this conjunction was in play for most of the 1960s. Probably one of the reasons I resonate so strongly with this conjunction is that it actually impacts me personally. I was born in 1968, so I'm part of that generation born in this time, and there literally was only 10 degrees. You too, Diana? Yeah, only 10 degrees between my Pluto, well, 7 degrees between Uranus and Pluto. And then I also have Jupiter in the mix right between those two planets. But even if it weren't affecting me personally, I definitely see that it is, something that's affecting our whole society. I don't know how old all of you are, and so I'm going to try to play a video clip, and I think I've enabled sound, but if you can't hear this, raise your hand and I'll stop it and click the settings again. This is only a minute, but I think it gives a wonderful brief highlight of some of the things that were going on in the 1960s, if you're not sort of intimately familiar with that era.
America, to a large extent, has forgotten the 1960s.
There were strange things in the air, and they found their way into the music.
And the new music and the new poetry came out of a very oppressive social time.
It has been such a defining decade in terms of the consciousness of people living today. It is also a moment that's often misremembered.
You really felt that there was a country trying to understand itself, trying to create an identity.
When you think of the 1960s, the Voting Rights Act, 1965, the women's movement started with the feminine mystique, 1962. The gay rights movement, Stonewall Inn, that was 1969. There's a 1960 in front of so much of the problems that we're dealing with today. We started to deal with them then.
So again, I didn't want to spend a lot of time there, but just a little overview.
This is an NBC special
of what was happening in the 1960s. A lot of changes occurring in my lifetime. So flipping the clock forward, again, when we look at astrology, we're looking at these very long cycles. And so we tend to look at when the outer planets are conjunct or together in the sky, when they're opposite each other, and when they're at 90-degree angles or squares, kind of just like the moon. So Uranus and Pluto came to their first quarter square position in the years of 2012 to 2015. And there was an exact square between those two planets 7 times in those 3 years. And at the time, Pluto was in Capricorn, that had entered in 2008 and is, of course, just wrapping up his time now. And Uranus was in Aries during that time. And we saw a lot of important developments in those 3 years. And again, I'm just kind of trying to set the stage. But if you'll remember back to 2012, President Obama was in office and was reelected. One of the big news stories out of 2012 was really about how we treated undocumented migrants into this country. And so Obama and the team, they put together the DREAM Act, known as ACT, which was an executive action to protect children of undocumented migrants and give access both to education and work opportunities. And President Obama was elected that year. It also was the beginning of the Affordable Care Act. The United States is sort of unique in the world in that we don't have healthcare as a universal human right. And so the ACA was our first attempt to get there. And in 2013, it was made broadly available, but there were all kinds of tech issues. The website didn't work. A lot of people who were eligible for coverage didn't get it. It was also really the beginning of the Black Lives Matter organization. You may remember Trayvon Martin was murdered by George Zimmerman in a suburb of Florida. And George Zimmerman in 2013 was acquitted of that murder, which then launched the Black Lives Matter group. At the same time, we had some important steps towards gay marriage. The Supreme Court made its first ruling that sort of opened the door by striking down some regulations about defining a man and a woman as marital partners. It didn't become fully legal until 2015, but 2013 was an important court decision. Some other important things you may remember are the Edward Snowden leaks about some of the hidden matters of US security. And of course, we had the Boston Marathon bombing. In 2014, we had a pandemic outbreak. It didn't really impact us in the US, but I had friends who were nurses in Canada who had training, and certainly the outbreak of Ebola in Africa affected other people. We had further engagements around recognizing that police were mistreating and killing Black men. There were large protests in Ferguson, Missouri, after Michael Brown was killed by police. We also had some sort of protests come up around the NFL on really two issues. One is their support and protection of players who have been investigated or even accused of and prosecuted of domestic violence, and also the recognition that they weren't really taking good care of their players and sort of the long-term effects of traumatic brain injuries. We had ISIS emerge as a terrorist threat, and lots of new court cases in states legalizing cannabis. Then the next year in 2015, we had more race riots in Baltimore after Freddie Gray was killed by the police, which fueled the BLM campaign even further. You might remember just the viral Ice Buck Challenge raising money for ALS, which was just kind of showing how something on social media could spread really rapidly. We had the first big climate agreement. 200 countries met in Paris and came to an agreement about how they were going to act to address climate change. Certainly what they've promised hasn't come to pass, but it was at least a point of, hey, we recognize this is a problem and action needs to be taken. And we also had Donald Trump announce his candidacy for the presidential election of 2016. So there were several sort of important turning points around particularly social justice, the political climate, terrorism, and around gay rights and gender issues during that square period. So that sort of leads us to, where are we now? I don't know why that looks funny. In 2020, as COVID kicked off, we actually still had Uranus in a square with Pluto, because again, these aspects tend to linger a long time. What really amped up the influence at that moment was not only was Pluto in Capricorn, but Jupiter came in making things bigger, and Saturn came in like imposing restrictions, making things serious. And so just to give you a sense of the chart here, you can see at March 1st of 2020, which is right before the very first COVID wave in New Orleans, right about the time it was hitting New York, we had the planet Uranus at 3 degrees Taurus, but Pluto was still at 24 Capricorn, only 9 degrees orb away from that perfect square. So it was a 99-degree separation. And again, in archetypal astrology, mundane astrology, we tend to look at 10 to 15-degree orbs. And you can see there that Jupiter and Saturn were right in the mix with Pluto. So really emphasizing that square, which is, I think, a lot of the explanation behind what happened to us in 2020 socially as we began to deal with this new pandemic and illnesses and deaths and shutdowns, but also aggravating the divides between us, the political divides between us, and really sort of shining a spotlight on some of our disparities between legal and illegal immigrants, between genders, and between racial groups. Later on that year, there was another great conjunction. Like in the grand scheme, I'm talking about Uranus, Pluto, but you may well remember that on the December solstice of 2020, we had a great conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn. They met together at 0 degrees Aquarius. And when that happened, it kicked off a couple of cycles, one of them shorter term, about a 20-year cycle until they meet again. And the other one is a 200-year cycle, because the reason I say a 200-year cycle is that Jupiter and Saturn are going to have their next 200 years of conjunctions all in air signs, whereas the last 200 years, they were all in earth signs. So there's a lot of shifts around topics related to air that are going to impact us over the next couple hundred years. So if we look at just that shorter term cycle, the 20-year one, which makes more sense for most of our lifespans, we're really at a waxing crescent or a sextile right now in that cycle. And we won't get to the first quarter of Jupiter and Saturn until August of 2024, so a year from now. And I just, in case you'd like to look at the charts, I'm putting them up here on the screen. On the left-hand side, we have, sorry about that. I'm trying to move my pictures so I can see. On the left-hand side, you can see that there is Jupiter and Saturn at 0 degrees Aquarius in the 11th house of the Washington, D.C. chart on December 21st. And then now, as of today, you can see that Saturn is at 17 degrees of Pisces, and Jupiter is actually, I'm sorry, this August 19th of next year, so a year from now, Jupiter will be at 17 degrees Gemini. It's kind of funny that it's exactly a year from now. We will be at that square between Jupiter and Saturn, which is kind of fortuitous about why I'm talking about it today, right? So that'll definitely be a turning point in this 20-year story that we started in December of 2020. In addition, we kind of have several big planetary moves. So my point here is that things are in motion. In the 1960s, a cycle was set, and now we're sort of moving the pieces down the board, if you will, if it were a Monopoly game. So you probably already know that in March of this year, Pluto entered Aquarius for the first time in 250 years. It only spent a couple of months in Aquarius and it then retrograded back, but it will be going back into Aquarius at the end of this year. It'll make one small retrograde into Capricorn again for a couple months, and then we are firmly in Pluto and Aquarius territory. We also had Saturn change signs in March. It was really just a super busy month this year. So Saturn entered Pisces, where it'll be for almost 3 years. Then in March of 2025, so a year and a half from now, Neptune will go into Aries. It's been in Pisces for several years. And just a couple months after that, Saturn is going to follow Neptune into Aries. So those two planets, Saturn and Neptune, will form another great conjunction, which is going to be the basis for a 36-year cycle. Not long after that, we'll have Uranus entering Gemini. So the next 2 years are sort of lots of changes that are setting the stage for us on a longer basis. And I am going to get into what it means. One of the things that I'm kind of looking forward to in the summer of July of 2025, once Saturn and Neptune are in Aries, Pluto is in Aquarius, Jupiter is in Gemini, we're going to have a minor grand trine between those 4 big outer planets. That is usually an acceleration of change, right? Because it's a combination of the trine between Pluto and Uranus and sextiles between Pluto, Saturn, and Neptune, and between Saturn, Neptune, and Uranus. And so I think we're going to see a lot of movement and a lot of rapid development as that cycle takes hold. So what to expect? I'm going to start with the big trine, because again, the Uranus-Pluto cycle is the one I'm most interested in. So between now and 2032, we really are in play of Uranus trine Pluto. And what a trine means is rapid developments. It's when 2 planets are cooperating with each other, and it's like things just flow, barriers fall down, things suddenly happen. And we think about Uranus as being a planet that represents the archetypes of innovation, revolution, like the Great Awakener, chaos, disruption, technological advances, huge advances in things like air travel or the way we communicate with each other. Whereas Pluto is, classically god of the underworld, but what Pluto can bring to societies is like big transformations, death of the old, rebirth of the new, kind of the phoenix energy. Also bringing hidden things to light, and really kind of like taking a deep dive into the underbelly. So a lot of times when we have big Pluto transits, there's exposing of what hasn't been working, exposure of deceit, exposure of scandal, etc. So I feel like as we move into, in this next decade, Uranus trine Pluto, we're going to have major transformations in our whole society as we reevaluate and we deal with what's been lost, what's been gained, where we are as a society. And also just the struggles for power that are ongoing. From my perspective, and probably yours, since you're into astrology, I think it's also a really ripe time for true shifts in consciousness, for spiritual awakenings, for broad cultural changes and new paradigms to emerge. And it's also sort of a fascinating time for me because the baby boomer generation is going to be experiencing, many of them, their Pluto opposition. Now, most of us as individual people don't have Pluto oppositions, right? Because Pluto takes almost 250 years to go around the zodiac. So the average time for a Pluto opposition would be like 125 years. However, because Pluto has a very elliptical orbit, it spends less time in some signs and more time in others. The generation of people who were born with Pluto in Leo, which represents a lot of the baby boomers, are actually going to experience their Pluto opposition. So it's hard to sort of break that down on an individual level, what that means, because frankly, we just don't see it very often. But it definitely feels like a reckoning, right? Because if you think about your Pluto square Pluto that happens during part of the midlife transits, it's a time when you really have to sort of face in your life what's working for you, what isn't working for you, anything that's like in your subconscious or your early childhood, or those like limiting beliefs. Also, any ways that you've given your power away to other people. And so I feel like because the baby boomers are still such a big generational influence, that this Pluto opposition that they're facing is going to impact all of us as they really have to come to terms with what's been done politically, in the environment, etc. Thank you, Diana. I see your comment. So I'm fascinated by that. And in fact, one of my own parents is a Pluto in Leo person. And so I'm really interested to see what happens in the development of their own chart and their life. But certainly it'll be a time, I think, of turning over power. Of the baby boomers, which have so long held power at the highest level of our organizations, our businesses, our politics, are going to be turning that power over. And I actually have some ideas about who may be picking it up. I'm part of Generation X, which is relatively small, but there's certainly generations beneath me who I think are larger in scope and have some unique gifts to offer the world. And so looking at the next decade, I've kind of split it into a few chapters, if you will, of alignments that are going to take place and how I think we may see it play out in our culture. I already talked about how in 2025, Saturn is going to conjoin Neptune in Aries. And again, this starts a new 36-year cycle. When you go back in the past, Saturn-Neptune cycles are often about the rise and fall of specific ideologies and ideals. So a lot of times that impacts religious institutions, political institutions, as well as our social environment. In many ways, it can be seen as the death of a dream, but also the beginning of a new one. And certainly we're already seeing climate crisis impacts here And we probably will continue to see that up through 2025 and further. Oftentimes Saturn and Neptune together, and of course they're together now in Pisces, even though they're not perfectly conjoined. It includes natural disasters involving water, which, you know, seems funny to say as we're now looking potentially towards a hurricane heading to Southern California, which is kind of an anomaly, and several storms in the Gulf. But there's oftentimes natural disasters involving water, issues around water, as well as then an outpouring of human compassion and willingness to sort of take a look and help. From there, we move into 28-29, in which case Saturn is going to be in Taurus and squaring Pluto in Aquarius. And I see this a little bit like 2020 in some regards. The square is a much harder aspect. And again, we have Saturn, who's often about restrictions and limitations and saying no, squaring this transformational energy. And so I see it as a time when we may have like consequences and backlash. Like, so whatever we really have changed in 25, 26, 27, in 2028, there's a backlash, whether you call it a conservative backlash or simply someone who's different saying, no, we need to go back to the old ways. We don't like these transformations. We don't like these changes. And again, this is the first quarter of that cycle that started in 2020. And so reactionary authoritism, repression, some economic hardships, power abuses, earthquakes, epidemics, those are things you often see when Saturn squares off with Pluto. Again, I think we have a broader, brighter story, but the way we tend to work as a human culture is kind of through ups and downs, right? Like we make progress, we go back. We make more progress, we go back. Very much a kind of a 2 steps forward, 1 step back situation. The period of time that I'm really excited about is that 2031 to 2033, when we have Saturn and Uranus together in Gemini. Another 45-year cycle here starts, where essentially it's the collision of the old and the new, the conservative and the very innovative and revolutionary and awakening. So what I see for that time period is that there could be some sudden collapses of things, but also that we will have enormous breakthroughs, that there'll be just massive technological advances. I'm personally hoping for teleportation. That's one of the apps I've always wanted. And that there may be big revolutions that kind of open up like a new sense of freedom and new possibilities. And, you know, I talked about how the Pluto and Leo generation, as they have their Pluto opposition, will be turning over power. A group that I'm incredibly interested in, and I don't know if any of you fall into this group, is between 1988 and 1990, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune were together in the sign of Capricorn. And I've had just a number of astrological clients who were born during that time. And I see that as a real potential for some creative genius from the folks who were born in that time period. Not that there won't be in others, but I just think we're going to have like new inventions and new leaders arise from this group, because they really have the unique ability to have a new vision and a new dream about the world, something that we haven't seen before and we haven't done before. But yet with that Saturn and Capricorn there, it's like they have the persistence and the maturity and the hard work and the responsibility to take leadership and to make that vision real. And so my view is I see this next 10 years as a particularly exciting time when we're going to see some advances. Then there will be some backlash and some stops, but then we'll have real breakthroughs and potential for awakenings and really taking society to a whole nother level. So I'm pretty excited about that. So where we are right now, the fourth quarter of 2023, I would say within these larger cycles of change, the remainder of this year, and really even 2023 since May, has been relatively stable. Like, it's not that we don't have small crises or surprising news stories, but in many ways, it's just sort of like more of the same. We're covering old territory, old issues. It's like we're just getting developments in the stories and the things we already know about. I guess the one sort of real advancement I've seen this year that really grabbed attention was the development of many different types of artificial intelligence and their applications to technology. And so I certainly think we'll see more of that throughout this Uranus trine Pluto period. But mostly what we've seen are things we've already heard about. Right now, it's just making the news, if that makes sense. And so in most of our personal lives and our communities at large, I don't see big world-changing events happening that are something unheard of or unanticipated in 2023. Now, climate crisis, I think we already know about, and certainly it's going to affect places it hasn't affected before. But again, that's part of like the old story, the story we're already aware of. So some specific spots to be aware of this year, like in your own personal transcript, because I'm kind of wanting to turn the lens now from what's going on in the world to what's going on with you and your life and me and mine. We're currently in the middle of, just past the middle of Venus's retrograde in Leo. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit when I get to our personal horoscopes. But Venus will be turning around in a couple of weeks. Meanwhile, Mercury is going to turn retrograde in Virgo. And so, you know, if you're a person who has strong Virgo in your chart, strong Mercury in your chart, taking stock of this Mercury retrograde in Virgo could be something you'd want to do. I actually kind of like this period because Mercury and Jupiter are going to be in a trine with each other really for 2 months, all of September and October, because well, August and September into October. It's not very often that we have Mercury in a trine with Jupiter for that long, but it's going to be because of the retrograde. And so I think this is a really great time to like reassess any plans you have, review plans, make edits, make changes. And you can really sort of tie during the retrograde and after, like your big picture vision to concrete steps and plans and organizations and systems. And so personally, I think the next couple of months could be a really productive period for you, despite the retrograde precautions of just going slow and knowing that technology is going to give us issues and like checking all of your plans. We do have an active eclipse season coming up in October. And it's going to be mixed eclipses because the lunar nodes have now switched to Libra and Aries. But this year, we're getting eclipses kind of still there and still Scorpio Taurus. So we have a solar eclipse on October 14th at 22 Libra. And then we'll have a lunar eclipse at 6 degrees Taurus right before Halloween. Fun. And so eclipses often bring just a little bit of like chaos and disruption in the world. Unless they strike personal planets or angles for you, I don't pay a whole lot of attention to them, but they certainly can sort of cause some plot twists in the world at large. And then we'll have another Mercury retrograde in Capricorn at the very end of the year, which I'm a little bit worried about in terms of just like messing up people's holiday travel plans. I don't know if you guys remember or if you were on the road last Christmas, but we also had Mercury retrograde last Christmas. And we had that huge fiasco with like the Southwest Airlines system going down and people being stuck in airports and at their destinations for days on end. And so that sort of thing very well could happen. And so for myself, I'm probably going to make sure that I drive and not fly this year for holiday travel, and also just give myself plenty of time on both ends of my itinerary for any potential situations there. So I'm going to sort of invoke your memory a little bit before we get into the forecast to think about how some of the big transits right now are shaping your life. And this is really where I've focused my forecasts. The first one, which is a shorter term transit that I just mentioned, is that Venus has been in Leo for an exceptionally long time this summer. Most of the time, Venus is only in a certain sign for about 3 to 4 weeks. But this summer, she's been in Leo since June 6th, and she will be in Leo until October 8th. And so you may already have a really strong sense about what this Venus and Leo period is doing for you, either for your romantic life or your money or your possessions or your appearance, your friendships. But if you haven't, you might go back and think about what happened in this same time frame in the summer of 2015 and the summer of 2007, and see if you're seeing any of those themes like reappear in your life. For me, I was graduating with my PhD in August of 2015. And it's sort of interesting because like I just took on a new teaching role where I'm actually teaching a class that's like the very first class in a doctoral nursing program of study. So I'm seeing a little bit of that like come through in my career area, which is sort of funny. You might not anticipate that from Venus and Leo, but that's my story. The other thing that's going on in your chart is wherever the sign of Taurus is, you have Jupiter and Uranus there. Jupiter moved in May of this year, the end of May, like the 20th, 26th, something like that. And it will be in the sign of Taurus until the end of May next year. So there may be some themes coming up for you in your sign of Taurus that are like, where are you growing? Where are you expanding? Like where you have opportunities? Maybe you're finding someone who's a teacher or a guide, or you're acting as a teacher or a guide in this area. The last time Jupiter would have been in this part of your chart would have been from June 2011 to June 2012. And if you could think back, you could also go back to the years 1999 and 2000 to sort of see, like, are there any of those themes that you can see coming through in the Taurus part of your chart? Diana says a new career mentor and Jupiter's in your 10th house. Yeah, the Jupiter cycles are really interesting because they repeat every 12 years, but there's another astrological forecasting tool called annual perfections. And so you're also in the same perfected house every 12 years. And so there's a lot of, like, it makes those Jupiter cycles even more important. I can literally go through my life and see in Jupiter cycles how I've made career and relationship turns over all of my adult life. With Uranus there, it's likely to bring some surprises, some unexpected things, maybe a little bit of innovation, revolution, liberation, and disruption to that Taurus part of your chart. The longer term cycle you probably want to pay attention to personally is that wherever Pisces is in your chart, you have Saturn and Neptune there. And that's a really interesting combination of planets because I talked about Saturn as being about maturity and responsibility and old things and restrictions and saying no and boundaries and limitations. Whereas Neptune tends to be prone to like imagination and escapism and new visions and sometimes addictive behaviors and sometimes like being vulnerable to deceptions or illusions or even a little bit of confusion. And so you have this interesting combination going on in Pisces. Saturn moved into this part of your chart in March of 2023 and will be there until February of 2026. So this may be an area of your life where you can really think about, how can I apply like responsibility and commitment and boundaries and hard work to something that I'm dreaming about? If you have any sort of creative or spiritual practice, I think the combination of Saturn and Neptune together can really help you like take what's in your spirit and your soul and turn it into like a daily practice where you're putting your ideals into action and you like developing authority in that area. I think it's a very, very creative mix of planets. They don't go easily together, so we have to think about how to incorporate them. I'm actually going to read for you guys. I had done for some of my clients earlier this year some Saturn in Pisces mantras. And I'll just kind of share them with you to give you some like food for thought. What I wrote down is some of my clients had Pisces in their 5th house. And so for them, I really talked about how can you get serious about your fun? Like one of my particular clients talked about how, she used to love live music and going to concerts and festivals. And over the last few years, she just quit, right? And so we talked about making a commitment for that, like buying the tickets, buying the trips, putting it on your schedule, not letting work interfere with it. So getting serious about fun, turning suffering into art, building and maintaining compassionate action, investing in water. If you're looking for an investment opportunity, like what helps protect people from water or delivers clean water, planning for flow in your life, like making sure you have the space and the resources you need to do those things which bring you like a sense of flow. It's also, I think, a really great time to work with your ancestors or any guides. And it may just be my personal circle, but I've seen lots of people talk about for the first time in the last year or so, doing work with their ancestors, building an ancestor altar, taking things in mediumship or psychicness. But it's a really good time with Saturn and Neptune for that. Having like containers for your feelings, whether it's through artwork or creative movement or journaling, but making space to honor your feelings and somehow get them like out of your body and into the world, making your dreams real. Or if you're a person who's interested in doing advocacy or service work, how can you help build systems of care and systems of compassion to, again, like bring your feelings into action and help your community? So the last time Saturn was in Pisces was back in 1993 and 96. And, for me, that was a really fun time when there was like new music. The whole grunge music scene sort of burst into action, which really hadn't been seen before. And so when I think back to that period and I listen to the music, I hear a whole lot of that, like turning your suffering into art, turning your protests into music, which is very much to me sort of resonance of what we heard in the music and the art scene of the 60s. And I think Saturn and Neptune can really bring that out. So again, if you have some creative practices, lean into that. Look at the Pisces part of your chart and see how you can make that work for you. So I put together some forecasts for zodiac sign. And since there's just 3 people on here, I don't know if you guys want me to read through them all, or if you want to toss up and tell me what your rising sign is, we can just like focus on those. And then I'm happy to share the slides or send them to you if you want to look at the others. But I don't want to bore you by reading a bunch of slides if there's people here who aren't interested. So what would you guys like to do? I see Cancer. Sasha and Tracy, do you want to share your rising sign? Cancer, Gemini, and Aries. All right, so let's go there. So just a few notes. I don't know how sophisticated in astrology you are, but when I'm interpreting and predicting for people, one of the things I always want to pay attention to is if an actual transit is happening in a house or a sign where you have important planets. So, if you're an Aries rising or if you're a Gemini rising, then certainly I'd always pay attention to what's going on in those signs, right? Because those are going to be very personal to your identity. I also always pay attention to what is in your birthday or your solar return chart, what's rising there or what's important. Or if you use annual perfections, like what's your annual perfected house, what's your annual Time Lord, and are those planets and places involved? So I'm kind of throwing that in as in your mileage may vary. Like these are broad forecasts for people who have your specific rising signs. Yours may be a little different based on your particular chart and what's going on for you in other predictive areas. So we'll start with Aries, right? Because everybody should start with Aries being like the first sign of the zodiac. With Venus in the 5th house for you this particular summer, and I'm talking about whole sign houses because that's easy to apply to everyone. I really hope you've been having some fun in the sun. It should be a time when it's like hot girl summer, right? Like you should be able to play. There might be a reemergence of an old flame or maybe even an old hobby that you had in the past. or even old friendships who come back. And so this summer for you, this Venus and Leo period is really a time to follow your heart and to make time for like what brings you joy, what brings you pleasure, what brings you like a sense of leisure and relaxation, and renegotiate any patterns that aren't working for you, right? If something is bringing you down, get rid of it and make pleasure and leisure your priority. With Jupiter and Uranus in your second house for the next year, you have a real shot at getting some inspiration and some breakthrough in your resources. And I particularly think about resources being financial, but it also can be things like the things you own, the movable objects you own, anything like, jewelry, possessions, clothes, accessories, even cars go into the second house. And so a question you might think about is, since May, have there been any surprises or disruptions in your finances and your possessions? If you had that in the past, right now is like potential for recovery. Like if when Saturn was going through that part of your chart, you had some hardship and you had some maybe heavy debts or periods of low income, Jupiter can bring you real potential to recover and change either how you're making money, how you're spending money, or getting some people to support you. It is important when Jupiter is in that part of your chart to beware overspending, like just because you're feeling a sense of abundance now, it may not last. And so, watch yourself and try to put some away for a rainy day. But hopefully this Jupiter Uranus transit in your second house will be really, really good for you. Now you have that Saturn and Neptune transit in your 12th house. And so that can mean that this may be a couple year period when you really want to spend a lot of time in like retreat and reflection, which I know doesn't really fit the short-term story of Venus and Leo this summer, right? But Venus and Leo this summer could well be thinking about what gives you pleasure. And you may change, like what gave you pleasure in the past may not give you pleasure now. You may want activities that are more alone or more intimate or less party vibe, more serious. But it's a good time to really invest work in your own imagination, your own vision, to think about consequences and karma. Again, it would be right for you to work for ancestral work. If there's any addictive patterns in your life, it's a good time to really address those, or any like unconscious things from your family of origin. A good time for therapeutic work. So I hope that was helpful. We will bump forward here. We'll skip through Taurus and go to Gemini. So with Gemini, having Venus in your chart this summer, it should bring to your third house, which is like the house of like your familiar environment, like your daily life, your communications, your social media, hopefully a greater sense of fun and pleasure around those things. It's a really good time to like chat with your neighbors, talk to your siblings, visit with the cousins, flirt with the barista, like try to sort of put some joy into your everyday, just in and around town, in and around the house, with your family, with your close friends. You have Jupiter and Uranus in that 12th house, which is interesting. Again, that can be a breakthrough time for spiritual understanding, spiritual beliefs, like developing a greater faith in yourself or the world around you. Just like with Aries, it's a really powerful time to explore the subconscious and unconscious realms. If you've ever wanted to like take a class in things that are spiritual, it's a great time to do it when you may have like exactly the right teacher and the right person show up for you. It also means that you can find rest and retreat and isolation to be like really rejuvenating and inspiring. Now you have Saturn and Neptune in your 10th house, right? And I think we just talked about that it gives you a serious focus on your vocation, your work in the world, your public image, your reputation, and your status. So this could be a time when like you actually do earn new titles or new responsibilities that people can see that you've become an authority, that you've become accomplished, that people like look up to you for guidance. Hard work will probably be necessary, whether it's driven by you or something outside is forcing you. It's also a time when I think you're going to find by the time Saturn leaves Pisces in 2025, and it'll bounce back in a little bit in 2026, if what you're doing for work, for vocation is not in alignment with your core values, you're going to make a change, whether it's you that makes that change or it's like you get pushed out through a series of layoffs or terminations or whatever. But it's definitely not a time to sacrifice your integrity for a paycheck. It's going to be really important that you do what is true to your heart and aligns with your vision. And Cancer. So for you, you have Venus and Leo in your second house this summer, which affects your income, your resources, your possessions, can also really be an examination of your self-confidence and your sense of self-worth. When Venus turns around, you may get a sense of, again, wanting to splurge on yourself or your friends or your family. A lot of times when people have Cancer as their rising sign, their spending isn't so much on them, but it's like, how do I make everyone else feel good? What do I, what do I buy for gifts? So again, like with Aries, I would say mind the budget. Your love isn't measured by a price tag. You have Jupiter and Uranus in your 11th house, which I actually really love. The 11th house is classically a place of your aspirations, your patrons or supporters, like your networks of people that can help you get what you want in life, or they can help raise you up. So it can be groups of friends, professional networks and organizations, colleagues. And so you're likely to have like unexpected opportunities come through these networks. And if you're not actively connecting with people, I would say use this Jupiter time to do it from now until next May. If there's somebody who like comes to your mind that you used to work with or used to be in a group with, and they've like kind of fallen by the wayside and you feel like connecting with them, like pick up the phone and do it, because it may be that like doors and windows just suddenly fly open for you in that regard. I think that's a really, really positive transit. And so you definitely want to work it, Diana. Saturn and Neptune for you are in the 9th house. And I think this is a really appropriate place for them, because the 9th house is all about your philosophy of life, your kind of the way you see the world. And it's really about like expanding your horizons. So with Saturn and Neptune here, you're kind of called to both consolidate and expand your worldview and your life experiences. You may be asked to travel for work, or find that you need to travel to work, or you might learn lessons from people or from sources that are foreign to you. It's also another really good time to study a subject. And you may want to study either by yourself, or you might want to study with like a group of sort of people who have a like-minded spiritual or religious or philosophical kind of goal. Like it's not so much I see about, I guess it could be in the classroom, but Saturn often forces you to take like a disciplined, almost ascetic sort of approach. It also could mean that you meet somebody who's like quite a bit older than you or quite a bit younger than you, where you're acting as Saturn or they are, where they sort of teach you some lessons that are about expanding your worldview. So I hope those were helpful to you. I'm just going to flip through the other slides. And like I said, I'm happy to send you guys, I think you probably would have to email me your, if you want the slides, you'll need to email me your email, because I don't have it on MeetUp. But my email is literally astrologywithdenise@gmail.com. Put it in the chat too. So if you want the slides, send me an email and I'm happy to share with them. My website again is astrologywithdenise.com. I am a professional astrologer. I teach nursing part-time still, but I'm mostly retired from nursing, and astrology is my my main job right now. So with that, like, do you guys have any questions? Is there anything that was particularly exciting? I would love to hear feedback from you. I feel like I've been chattering on now for an hour. Anything to share?
No, that was great. Thanks. I was trying to think. I'm I'm interested on your opinion. Once Pluto makes their way out of Capricorn, and like I have a Cancer sun, and so I always feel that really, I don't know, birthdays are weird. And I'm but I also can't remember a time when I have been thinking of it consciously where I haven't had that opposition come up around that time.
Oh, wow. So when's your birthday?
The 16th of July.
Yeah, so yeah, Pluto will be in Aquarius at that time, and it won't be opposite your sun on your birthday anymore. And that's really exciting, I think. It gets, it gets Pluto away from you, right? It gets Pluto in a quieter, like a dark place. So I don't know anything about the rest of your chart, but I would very much look forward to that. I know personally, I have a Capricorn moon. So guess what? Every month, right? When the moon comes around to Capricorn, I feel that Pluto opposition, and almost like clockwork, I can feel myself just getting super moody, that day. And it's like, oh yeah, of course, moon's opposing, Pluto, may as well just go to bed. So I think that's a really good thing to look forward to.
Yeah. And also thinking around, so I tend to use like classical significations. So like I don't think of Pluto being the ruler of Scorpio. I have a
I don't
Scorpio
either.
moon. Okay, but I also like thinking about how those planets do have these like long reaching like impacts over time.
I've thought about it a lot because so for me, Pluto will be going into Aquarius, which is my second house, right? And Pluto's going to be there for a long time, like 20 years. So the thought that I might have transformation around my finances and my possessions in 20 years, to me, it's like, well, duh. I mean, of course I would, right? One way that I've studied a lot with Sam Reynolds. And so one of the things he's told me to think about is just think about like all the outer planets as having substantial transformation where they are. And so if you think back to the time period when Neptune went through Aquarius and when Uranus went through Aquarius and like what those impacts were on you, that might be how you can anticipate this Pluto period. It's going to have a different flavor, but the same kinds of things. And when I looked back on it, when Uranus was in Aquarius was actually like my highest earning years, which is interesting, right? So I don't know. I'm hopeful that the Pluto death and rebirth will be like, better rebirth than death, right? And Pluto also, I think, can be a whole lot about taking back your own power, where we've given it away. And, a lot of us, particularly those of us who, identify as female, like that's a problem for us. Like we've, and so I'm really hopeful that Pluto in Aquarius will, first of all, glad it's not going to be angular for me anymore. Yay. And second of all, I'm optimistic about the potential for innovation and community and networking and advances that maybe can bring us away from this brink of crisis that we seem to be on.
Yeah. I heard a really beautiful descriptor for Pluto by Lindsay. They go by Bad Pastor on Instagram. And it was like Pluto as the witness, as in like this instance of the best aspects of priesthood, like the witness, not necessarily only the engine, but like the witness to the transformation and what withstands and remains in the midst of all of it. And I thought there was just this beauty of thinking about like Pluto as witness to like total upheaval. I just thought it was really lovely when thinking of Pluto. I was like thinking,
yeah, she has a wonderful way with like seeing the spiritual value of planetary transits, even though she's more of a traditional astrologer, but her religious training and background. It's funny because Sam, when he described Pluto in my very first class I ever talked about him, he talked about Pluto as like the grave digger.
Ooh.
It's like it's a kind of like Saturn. It's like it's a dirty job, but it's necessary, right? Like you need somebody who's there for you, who's like supportive, who's saying, okay, let's take care of this. And I'm a gardener, and so I often think about Pluto in terms of my compost pile, you know. And even though like I throw things in the compost and they decay and they don't look pretty, they give me such like fertile soil then that I can use to start new life. And so that's kind of how I've often seen Pluto. But I think part of the grace of Pluto is that it is a very long and slow moving transit. And so unless it's exactly on one of your personal planets or opposite your personal planet, then I tend to think it works much more in society and more subtly in our own lives.
Yeah, I love that idea of grave digger, right? It makes me think of like Pluton too.
Uh-huh.
Like the things that are beneath.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. That's gorgeous.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we don't like to talk about death in our society, but it's a really necessary function. Like just like birth, it's like a critical part of life. So, you know, and I think we can all agree that there are some systems we have that need to die, you know, that we need to have some new birth around some of our community systems. And of course, Aquarius is considered to be, you know, that of like the more networked community. It's not so much about the individual, right? It's about the group, the ideal, right? And so I'm looking forward to that. Yeah, good comments. Diana, Tracy, you guys have anything you want to add?
Hi, thank you for your wonderful presentation. That was so good, so good. You explained it so well. I enjoyed it so much. I want to ask you, I don't work with whole houses. I work with I don't know the name of it. Not the whole houses. What do you call them?
Well, there's several systems, and I don't work exclusively with hold houses, but when you're talking to a group like this, it's like the easiest way to sort of blanket say. But there's
totally
Placidus, there's Regiomontanus, there's Coke, there's a lot of different house systems.
Right. I have a question. Well, two. The first one is my Saturn has been transiting my 8th house, and it's not going to be leaving my 8th house until March of next year. I'm tracking this because it's been completely life changing. I'm a double Cancer, a Cancer Sun and Cancer Rising. So I've had the whole shebang and the kitchen sink thrown at me in the last few years, and I have Jupiter in my 1st house. So, and you know, so my question is, what would you suggest for the remainder from now till next March, as Saturn is still, besides holding on for dear life, as it's, you know, still in, you know, the 8th house. I've been studying astrology, you know, basically for 2 years full time, and now I study every day. So what do you suggest that I can do? And also Jupiter is still hanging in my 10th house, which I need right now because I just started a new career. I got hired actually the day of the eclipse at the 29th degree. You can't make this up. And
Wow.
I really have had a difficult time connecting with groups in person, as my 20-year cycle with my old group completely collapsed back in 2019. Those are my two questions. What are you suggesting, especially for the 8th house, the remainder of the transit of Saturn and Pisces in the 8th? It's a woozy, this one.
Yeah, I mean, Saturn in the 8th house, you know, the 8th, from the traditional astrological perspective, the 8th house is often about other people's money, like the resources that you share, what you owe to other people, what they owe to you, as well as being like a house of endings, you know, of death, whether that be a literal death or just like metaphorical death, but things dying, fears around things dying, endings of things, fears, anxieties, but also resources, and so Saturn transiting through your 8th house, think about like what lessons that wants to give you. And so it's probably a time when you're really supposed to be reevaluating what you owe to other people and what they owe to you and what's fair and where are your boundaries and how to say no. Like, are there places in your life where you haven't been living up to what you've committed to other people, whether that be individual people or I don't know, your civic responsibility or etc. I've seen people use it to do like financial restructuring, like whether that be looking at things like debts, mortgages, student loans, like taking care of financial things. So if that's a problem with you, it's something Saturn wants you to address. And the other thing is really just like facing the idea of loss and what that means to you, your
Yes.
fears and your losses. So I would say it's a time to do therapeutic work, whether that's working with a professional or it's, journaling yourself and doing some workbooks, but really thinking about the concept of endings and what are
Yeah.
endings and what does that mean for you and what's next. I mean, it does end. It isn't always the most fun. For me,
No.
Saturn has actually been, Saturn's a pretty strong planet in my chart. And so oftentimes I've been given monies when it goes through my 8th house, like I got a full scholarship to a master's degree program. It's like, so I've had really great Saturn in the 8th house experiences, but I know not everyone does. It can also be a lot around legacies and inheritances. So it may be a time when if you haven't done it, you want to think about, do you have your healthcare power of attorney paperwork done? Do you have a will? Do you have, things in place for if something would happen to you, to your health, to your life?
Yeah. Well, there's been a literal death. It's been the old me. The old me is completely done. And then my comment would be for our generation, a Generation X. I mean, what do you think that we could contribute? Because I know the baby boomers it's time to pass the baton. I totally hear you. I agree 100%. What do you think that we could continue like as a bridge to the generation that comes after us, which you were talking about them being future leaders, and I agree again with you. What do you think that we can do to help them?
I think we're moderators and we're guides. What I see happen in the circles that I'm in, like even in astrology and professional organizations, is you have this group of older baby boomers who are often the formal leaders, and they have lots of assumptions and expectations. And then you have these younger groups of people who have completely different things. And where I see it happen most often is with things like gender identification and stereotypes, etc. And so on one hand, you have the baby boomers who are like, well, you guys are really weird and you just need to not be offended. And then you have this younger generation who's like angry and vocal and like, you've done the wrong thing. And I feel like that as Gen X, it's like, we kind of can bring people in the middle, like to a degree, right? It's like, we've had to spend our whole lives accommodating the baby boomers. And so in some ways, it's like a real relief to see people standing up to them. Because like, we couldn't because we didn't have the power, we didn't have the numbers. Like if we spoke up, then we never got promoted and we never got blah, blah, blah. We just got shut out. So we have these younger people who have the volume and we're like,
exactly.
But we also, I think, need to mediate a little bit, because what we don't want to do is create bigger rifts in our society, right?
No,
like, so
exactly.
helping people to maybe like find the common ground and see each other's perceptions and also support them. Because like we have, I think in general, better communication skills. They're better with technology, but a lot of them really missed out. And particularly people who are younger and during their like college, early adult days, there was COVID lockdown. Like, so being able to work within an organization, being able to compromise, being able to, like, I feel like we have things to offer in that regard because we've had to do it our whole lives.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. I couldn't agree more with every single thing you said, especially with the, that we couldn't stand up to these people because if not, we would be shut down. I mean, I'll have to use my Mars and Libra. I'm in the legal field, so I'll have to use my Mars and Libra because there's still a lot of pushback from the boomers. They're just clinging on for dear life. You know what I mean?
I do. I mean, all you got to do is look at a picture of our Congress and our Senate, right?
Oh my God. Oh my God. I'm sorry. I'm going to say it. What a clown show, man.
Yeah. Pluto and Libra and like late Virgo and Libra. Yeah. It kind of crosses a couple generations. Where Pluto and Scorpio tends to be more like the millennials and beyond. And I love the Pluto and Scorpio generation. Like one of my favorite like keywords for them is you guys are not afraid to call out the bullshit. Like you see the bullshit and you call it out. And I
know, I love them. I love
Mhm.
them, and I've worked with a lot of Pluto and Scorpio generation
Mhm.
girls, guys, and girls. You know, when I was mentoring back in the organization I was in, but that collapsed in 2019. I have like the empty nest syndrome after the Chiron return. So I'm trying to find my space in the world because I've always been a guide. So I appreciate it. I'm gonna keep moderating. I'm not a kind of shit stir. You know what I mean? I like to keep
Yeah.
the peace. But sometimes they don't let you get a word in what
Is
edgewise.
your Pluto in Libra, Diana?
No, mine is in Virgo, Pluto in Virgo, and I
Mine
have
too.
a stellium, and I also have Venus in Virgo. So I
Yeah.
like to clean and keep it all clean, if you know what I mean.
But there's also something about the Pluto and Virgo generation that we want to serve. Like we want to
Yes,
serve the greater cause. We want to serve the
100%.
greater community.
Yes, and I'm grateful that Pluto in Aquarius is going to start off in my seventh house. So I'll
Mm,
have to rebuild some relationships. It's not going to leave my seventh house to go to meet in my eighth till 2030, according
yeah,
to my chart.
a
So
long
I
time.
got some time to make some relationships. So thank you very much, and I'm going to check out your website. You're just
Thank you.
excellent.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you.
Tracy, you have anything to add before we head out?
Oh no, I'm great. Thank you. This has been fantastic. I'm pretty new to everything, so I'm
All right,
just
well, I'm
taking it
sorry
all
if there's
in.
any words I use. I kind of at the meetups never know exactly what the knowledge level is going to be. So I hope I didn't overwhelm you.
Oh no, it was perfect. And yeah, I'm learning and this is all great. I took notes.
Excellent. Well, if you want to shoot me an email, I'm happy to send you the slides. And I'm planning that our next meetup will be in person, although that could potentially change because end of September is always like high hurricane season. So if there's any risk of storms, I'm not going to have an in-person meetup. We'll just jump to virtual. But I will I'll post that on Meetup. And thank you guys all for sharing your Saturday afternoon with me. Have a great day.
Bye, y'all.
You too. Thank you.